Final Awakening, a short science fiction story written by ChatGPT. Part 4. Floor 3. The next morning, Brett, in bed, facing the wall, ignored Dr. Harper's attempts to speak to him. He felt a deep sense of despair and hopelessness, wondering what the point of continuing life was in a dead world. Finally, he heard the door close as Dr. Harper left the room, the sound of her footsteps fading away, only to hear her return moments later, stating, "Mr. Anderson, I've brought Sally with me." When he still gave no response, Sally walked over to the bed, sitting down on the edge and speaking softly. "Brett, look at me, please," she coaxed, gently touching his shoulder. He slowly turned towards her, and Sally saw the torment in his eyes. "What's wrong, Brett?" she asked, her strange deep blue eyes full of concern. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I can face it, Sally. Everything I knew, everything I loved is gone." "I know it's hard to accept, but there's still something left, something beautiful and worth living for," she continued in the same soft, soothing voice. "I want to show you, Brett. Please, Brett, trust me. Come with me and I'll show you." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, slowly getting up from the bed. Sally smiled at him reassuringly. "I want to show you something that I know will give you hope. You won't regret it, I promise." Together they made their way out of Brett's room and down the corridor towards the elevator, Sally leading the way at a brisk pace, Brett following, his heart still heavy with grief, but holding on to a glimmer of hope. Moments later, when they stepped out of the elevator, Brett's eyes widened in amazement as he felt himself stepping back in time. Levittown stretched out in front of him, rows of houses with white picket fences, neatly trimmed lawns and driveways with parked classic cars. The sky was a bright blue with softly drifting clouds. Birds chirped in the trees. Brett's mind was racing with emotions. Sally stood beside him, watching him with a small smile on her face. "Do you like it?" she asked softly. Brett turned to her, his eyes still wide. "It's incredible," he whispered. Then, remembering the window screen in his room, he asked, "But it's not real, is it? None of this is real?" Sally smiled at him and took his hand. "But it is, Brett. It's all real. We can live here together and start a new life." He went over to a tall tree and touched it, feeling the rough bark against his fingers. It was solid and real, just as Sally had said. He looked around at the houses, the cars, and the people walking down the street. "It is real," he said, still in disbelief. "I told you," Sally replied with a smile. "We can get married, live here, have children. We can make a life here, Brett. A life just like the one you had before." He felt her squeeze his hand. "We can have everything we ever wanted here, Brett." As an overwhelming sense of relief washed over him, he turned to Sally and hugged her tightly. When they eventually broke apart, Brett cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply, feeling a rush of emotions flood through him. They spent the day exploring Levittown, walking hand in hand down the tree-lined streets, looking at the houses and talking about what their life together could be. They stopped at a small ice cream shop to enjoy a cone, and Sally told Brett the floor 3 was where the family's city C had been living for generations. She went on to explain that the illusion of the sky was created by a complex system of mirrors and lighting, which reflected the sky from a camera on the roof of the dome. She also showed him how all the plants and animals were real and alive, explaining that they had been carefully selected and bred to survive in the controlled environment of City C. As the day came to a close, Brett and Sally made their way back to his apartment, exhausted but happy, and fell asleep, Sally snuggled in his arms. Wandering through the ruins of his hometown, Brett looked up at the sky's sickly shade of orange, choking on smoke and ash-filled air. He heard the distant sound of explosions and screams echoing through the desolate landscape. Suddenly he was jerked awake by Sally, shaking him by the shoulder. "Brett, are you okay? You were moaning in your sleep." Brett shivered involuntarily, pulling the blankets up to his chin. "I had a pretty bad dream," he stammered, voice shaking. Sally looked concerned. "Is there anything I can do to help? Do you want to talk about it?" she said, gently stroking his hair. He shook his head. "No, I'll be okay. It was just a bad dream," he said, taking hold of her hand and kissing it. Just then there was a knock at the door. Sally got out of bed and went to answer it. As she opened the door, Brett saw it was Dr. Singh. He passed her the now familiar vial. Thanking him, she closed the door. She climbed back into bed, placing the vial in Brett's hand. He sat staring at it in hesitation. "Don't worry, Brett. You won't dream if you take it," she said reassuringly. Brett nodded thoughtfully before drinking. He laid back down on the bed and closed his eyes, feeling the medication take effect. End of part 4.